One of the aspects of the Bhagavad Gita that I find most enjoyable, intriguing, inspiring is the clarity of thought, the honesty, the realism, the humanness, which is expressed in this great dialogue between Arjuna and Krishna. Arjuna is the seeker, just like us, the human in us. And Krishna is guiding Arjuna, not from some lofty place where he's completely disconnected from the realities of Arjuna's life and Arjuna's mind, but as a friend, as a loving guide who understands the realities of life. There's this idea of spiritual bypass, where we use spiritual interpretation as a tool to avoid finding a lasting and real resolution to problems in our life, problems in the world. We look beyond and try to take a shortcut, but in the end, don't find ourselves moving forward because we need to address what is clear and present right in our life, right before us, and not avoid it. Honesty and recognizing that meaningful transformation in life comes not by denying the mundane aspects of our life, but rather breathing sanctity and sacredness into the mundane, building a bridge between the spiritual and the worldly, and finding resolution of underlying issues which are leading us to a state of pain or imbalance. And Krishna understands this. And in chapter 2, verses 42 to 44, articulates it in a beautiful and really quite surprising way, directly taking on, maybe articulating what's an ancient view on this modern phrase of spiritual bypass, and reminding Arjuna that wisdom-driven action, which is immediately what he talked about right before these verses, is the key. And then he reminds Arjuna why. And I'll read them to you. Krishna reminds Arjuna, those who lack understanding speak this flowery language, delighted by the words of the Vedas, the ancient sources of wisdom, O Arjuna. Such people who lack understanding declare, there is nothing else. Sometimes, and what is translated here as flowery words, which is what Krishna is saying, sweet-sounding words are empty unless there's action to back it. So when someone simply declares, there is nothing else, only this reality, unless it's backed by something more, it doesn't take you anywhere. And he continues. He's really driving the point home. For the self full of desire, whose intent is on the celestial world, something of a spiritually significant nature, this flowery language bestows another birth as the fruit of action. It doesn't lead us to that lasting freedom where we're out of the cycle of birth and death, or let's call it out of our present woes. It doesn't lead us out of that. It brings us right back here again. Preoccupied with various ritualistic acts, this self is directed toward the goal of worldly pleasure and power. This means that until we take meaningful action, until we really transform the nature of desire, which is the underlying root of inner conflict, we will be brought back to the same point. And these, what are translated here as ritualistic acts, all of the spiritually inspired actions that we take, all the things we do to feel like we're spiritual, if they're not underpinned by a deeper knowledge and are not carried through by wisdom-driven actions, buddhi yukta, they're simply another expression of trying to achieve a worldly goal. Everything has its rightful place. The worldly and the spiritual, the sacred and the mundane. Asking for the right thing from the right place at the right time is what we're able to do when our mind is with us, which is what Krishna is reminding. That the goal of yoga is to awaken ourselves unto that inner discernment, the buddhi, and allow our actions to be guided by it. And the final verse in the sequence, now verse 44. For those attached to worldly pleasure and power, whose thoughts are stolen away by this flowery language, this idea that sweet-sounding spiritual words can take away all of our woes and fix whatever is the underlying problem. Discernment that is resolute in nature is not discovered in perfect meditation, in samadhi. So practice is done. Spiritual practice is done. The practices that we think are going to lead to a spiritual outcome don't bear the fruit that we're seeking when we are still motivated by the pursuit of power and worldly desires. What it really means is that we need to understand what we want. If there are unresolved aspects of life, so what's the context of this story of Arjuna? There is a battle between these two factions of the same ruling family. There is a conflict of power and control. There's a difference of opinion about what is the appropriate form of justice that should govern and guide the kingdom that they are both in conflict over. This is a worldly matter. Spiritual anchor can illuminate our life, but we need to bring that spiritual illumination to bear upon our actions that directly impact the source of our conflict and work with it. The essence of spirituality is not to try to find a way out of this world, but rather a way to understand this world, to find an equilibrium while living in this world, and to understand how the best of ourself, that buddhi, that inner discernment within, can guide our actions. When our actions in the world lead us to a place of balance in the world, we find a sense of peace, which reflects within. As we find that peace within, we're able to express it outside ourselves. And there's a beautiful resonance, a feedback loop that forms. That feedback loop can't be shortcut. We can't think our way out of conflicts that are rooted in our world. We need to find an anchor within, yoke our mind to that inner source of resilience and clarity, buddhi, but then allow that wisdom and clarity to guide our actions in the world. That is what Krishna is reminding Arjuna very early on in this 18-chaptered classic, because he doesn't want Arjuna to just think that by hearing a few of these words and telling himself what he wants to hear, he'll be able to find resolution. Arjuna must act, but he has to find an anchor first within to help stabilize this sense of complete dislocation, fear, doubt, grief that he's drowning in. Wisdom-driven action is the key. And when we do so, we do find a lasting freedom, not just a spiritual bypass where we think we're momentarily free, but find ourselves coming back to the same reality again and again, and not finding that lasting joy and peace, which is what great texts like the Bhagavad Gita proclaim that life holds for us.